lot of familiar names and faces this morning.
Yep.
Excellent. Good. I want to welcome everybody to the LTAD Chat Live. This is actually our 9th episode, but really we feel the conversations are evergreen, or they are going to be here forever and available and applicable to anybody working with youth of all ages and abilities who engage in long-term athletic development programs that promote activity, fitness, physical literacy, and psychosocial well-being. Rick, did you see what I did there? Just wove in the NSCA LTAD Pillar 2.
There you go. Outstanding.
Yeah. My name is Joe Eisman. I've been the host or the moderator for LTAD Chat thus far, but I'm always joined in the back room by my colleagues, Tony Moreno and Rick Howard, to share ideas about these chats. And today, the other two amigos are going to join me on this call where we highlight the LTAD Playground, what has happened in the past 2 years since the inaugural event in Philadelphia. We're also going to include some participation from a few of you on this call who have been part of that event and part of the journey along the way. And then we're going to finish up with some current happenings in this space. So let's kind of dive in here and start. I'm going to start with Mr. LTAD himself, Rick Howard, as this story really starts to unfold about 5+ years ago, and probably even longer than that, within the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And Rick was a really vital part of the efforts to initiate the NSCA Youth or Long-Term Athletic Development Special Interest Group, and then a vital part of drafting the NSCA Long-Term Athletic Development Position Statement as well. So Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you here. So if you can share some of this history about the LTAD SIG and then efforts that kind of led up to the position statement and the 10 pillars of long-term athletic development, and then maybe finish off with your conceptualization of, I guess, what you call the 10 proclamations.
That sounds great, Joe. So thank you. This is great putting this together for everybody, and I really appreciate everybody who is on this LTAD chat today. There are some familiar faces and also some faces that we haven't had before. So I think that's an exciting blend as we move forward. So I have my screen shared. You'll probably hear my dogs in the background, but that's okay. They've been an integral part of LTAD as well. And so Tony shares lots of things about movements with dogs. So I'm always excited about that. So happy when my dogs decide to get up and run around. So anyway, this all started several years ago, and through my background and training, I started looking at this because I think one of the things we always talk about is we each need our own personal philosophy that guides us. For those of us in the academic world, we try to get our students to recognize that and understand that. But what I find happens in physical education, physical activity, physical literacy, sports, whatever it is, we don't really look at our philosophy to understand what the why is and what we're doing and how we're going to get there. So my first conversation actually was to figure out where should this all start from my experiences. And I went to the one in the center, which is the wellness wheel. So if you look at the different ones on the bottom left, that is the original Ballier LTAD model, which has subsequently been developed into the USOPC's American Development Model. So I know Joe's going to share with everybody later, but there's an LTAD chat coming up with executives from the USOPC sharing their visions and views on that. The bottom right is more from Dave Stodden's work with physical activity and the interconnectivity of motor competence, physical activity, and weight. The one on the top right is more related to physical education and physical literacy with some of the traits that are necessary there. The top left is something that I've been following since my days of being the director of athletics in the school district of Philadelphia, which was to really look at a positive youth sports model. What should it really encompass? Because oftentimes, going back to the wellness wheel, we only look at that physical part. We don't look at any of the other dimensions for our kids to get them to be the best they could possibly be. So when you look at all of the ones on the outskirts, they rely predominantly on the physical aspect of holistic well-being for kids, but we needed to do more. So luckily, Joe had mentioned the National Strength and Conditioning Association. I've done a lot of volunteer work for the National Strength and Conditioning Association, Shape America, a couple ACSM committees. So I like all the organizations and they all bring something to the table. But NSCA really helped to hand me the ball and say, you know what, run with it, do what you can. And I can't tell you how much I really appreciate that. So they have volunteer leadership opportunities that are available. So it's easy to be able to put that out there to make that happen. So through that, at one of the meetings, they said, hey, is anybody interested in putting together any special interest groups? And it just happened to be in a conference where there was a presentation on nothing new is out there. It's all old. So they looked at things like kettlebell training and women's fitness and all these things that we think are new and recent. And they showed historically how a lot of that had happened. I'm like, you know what? There's really a need for this. And at the end of their presentation, they said, and there must have been 1,200 in the room. They said, how many here really think that there should be daily physical education? Of course, everybody jumps up and down, yeah, and then everybody leaves the room. And we see that all the time, right? I'm like, well, we need to do something about this. So I was able to go to the volunteer leadership meeting that they had and said, how do we put together a special interest group? I just signed on, as you can see in the right, NSCA is organized by region. So I was the state director in Delaware at the time. And so I went to the meeting to see what else I could actually do. So I think that was part of it, to be able to do that. Let me just go over here for a second. And got a couple people waiting to get in. All right, there you go. All right, so we're all set. So through that opportunity, I said, there's got to be more I can do. And luckily, there was. So what we were able to do was to go to an NSCA and say, look, this LTAD thing is really, really important. So we started a youth special interest group in 2004. And then we were able to get enough people to the table to say, this is really something that needs to happen. What can we do? So we approached NSCA after a couple of meetings and said, you know what, we really need to have NSCA's position on long-term athletic development that really has to come out there. And NSCA said, I don't know. Took it to the science committee and everything. They said, there's really not enough evidence. So how about we'll let you do an invited review first? And I said, okay, we'll do that. So we wrote this first part, this invited review, where we first shared the youth physical development model for boys and girls. So another plug that I know Joe will mention again later, but Rodri Lloyd and John Oliver, who created this and were part of the LTAD as well, are also doing a call coming up for LTAD chat. But when we went through this, we explored all the different models that were out there, the pros and cons of each, and then said, you know what, we really should look at this positive youth development model because it incorporates all of our fundamental motor skills and all of our physical qualities throughout childhood and adolescence. But when we finished this, we said, you know what, there's something missing though. What do we do with all of this information? Now we know what's out there, and how many people have actually put that out there, right? Here's what we need to know. So we actually went ahead and did a second part, which we said that we weren't going to publish our article. I'm sorry, hold on. Boys, shh. Thank you, sorry about that. So anyway, so for our second part of it, we said, here's our solutions. Here's what we found. So over on the left, we said, all right, so physical activity peaks at age 6. Right about the time when kids go to school and go into first grade and they don't have that time to move around anymore. And then physical activity in life is so critical to long-term athletic development, no matter which model it is. And kids aren't getting enough strength and anything else that we need to have available for them. And fundamental motor skill competency is down. So the strategy should really incorporate all that. So what we ended up coming up with all that was, during childhood, we know there's a plasticity of our neuromuscular system that we should take advantage of. We should focus on muscle strength. Physical education curricula should be developing the breadth of movement skills and strength across the developmental continuum, and should have a central tenet for meaningful physical activity that enhances both physical and the health-related and the skills fitness components. So we came up with a solution, but it turned out to be a huge article. So after we did that and it was relatively successful, the NSCA said, you know what, that did what it needed to do. Go ahead and do the paper. So Carwin Sharp, who is at the NSCA, is now actually with USOPC. He led the paper when he did that. We put out a big list, all the special interest groups and leadership at NSCA. What should be the top topics that we look at to do a position statement? LTAD was near the top. We got a group together. Rodri Lloyd spearheaded that, and we came up with this model so that we could promote long-term athletic development, and we'll get into that in a second, to have a more unified and holistic approach. Most of the models were sports-focused, so we wanted to have something a little more holistic. And we wanted to promote the benefits of a lifetime of physical activity, prevent and minimize injuries, and implement sports skills and muscle strength training throughout. So we did the model, had 10 pillars, which were shown here in a wonderful infographic, because that's how most people get their information these days. Boys, stop it. Sorry. So we came up with this model, and Anna Virgil actually came up with a really nice way of framing this to say that it has to be individualized, it has to sample, we have to make sure the kids have all different modes to enhance their development. Qualified professionals need to be part of it. And number 5, which I always thought should be like the top pillar and one off which all the others were based, the health and well-being of the child is the central tenet of LTAD. So a lot of things that were in here, but what was really refreshing with what we did was how we defined long-term athletic development as chronic development of athleticism over time. Although it goes back to youth, what we've done since then is expand that cradle to grave. So LTAD isn't something that just happens when you're a kid and then it stops. And then we looked at athleticism because one of the biggest problems I think we have in promoting LTAD is as soon as we say athlete, a lot of people in phys ed shut us out. They're like, well, it's not all about athletes. But if you go back to how athleticism has been developed over the years, even Dan Bowerman at Nike said that anybody with a body. Tom Ferry with Aspen Institute, anybody with a body. So athleticism is relative to the development of that person. And Margaret Whitehead reflected that also in her physical literacy talks about how it's within your given level of endowment. So in our society, we look at athleticism as only elite athleticism, but no, it's really that development of the fundamental motor skills and abilities throughout the life course. So we were excited to be able to put this together. So wow, we're really making progress. We wanted it to have legs. So we created some subsequent articles we could share later, but they're on the website of NSCA under long-term athletic development. So we said, all right, we got all this stuff. We're gonna get ready to go. Guess what happened? Nothing. This was 2016 when the paper came out and all of this other material came up. So yeah, you're looking at a blank screen on purpose. It was frustrating. So 2016, we didn't really get the promotion and the push we were hoping we could get. 2017, the same thing happened. So by 2018, and I've been working on a blog, which is kind of like one of those pet side projects that realizing getting off the ground. But in 2018, in January, I was writing a blog and I said, you know what, instead of writing a resolution, I'm gonna start a revolution. But I like the definition of a revolution as a drastic and far-reaching change in the ways we think and behave. And I said, well, let's see how we can apply that to physical activity, physical education, play, and sports. So at the end of the day, and after about a month of writing, I would introduce 2 or 3 of these at the time until I had all 10 proclamations, which we'll notice now actually align pretty well with a lot of the other proclamations or things that are out there. We mentioned Tom Ferry and his Project Play. He has his 8 plays. The first one is Ask the Kids. Well, holy cow, so is mine. I've taught physical education. I've been a coach. I've done a lot of this stuff. So I recognize how important it is to engage the kids in the process. It's not a youth-centric model. And it is youth-centric. It's been adult-centric. So we need to rethink our model. And I think in this current environment and climate, we have the perfect opportunity to really make things happen before it's too late. And we go back to the same old, same old. So we look at the kid-centric outcomes. We need physical education every day. Focus on wellness and performance. For some reason, it became a dichotomous thing. You're either on the performance track or you're on a participation wellness track. There are a lot of things, and there's a paper by Ford et al. Back in 2011 where they talked about coming back and forth within the models. And I think we really need to take a closer look at some of that information. So check on the volume of training. I know, Joe, you've spoken about this quite frequently too. How much activity are kids actually getting? Because there are a lot of kids getting too much activity and too many not getting enough. You know, over 25% of kids don't even play sports. So we need to make sure we're including all of our kids in what we're doing. Find some of these champions. And I know Tony's going to talk about this coming up too. Who are those champions and how do we get them on the same page? So it's been some pretty exciting work we've been able to do over the last couple of years together by actually, we're kind of like the brokers, if you will, of being able to tie the grassroots element to those champions of youth sports, because each has their own role to play, but we can kind of help bridge that gap and bring researchers, practitioners, top and bottoms together. And so the most important thing, of course, was the grassroots is us, and it's you. So thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I think all of us could just listen to you all day long.
Talk all day long.
Just a vast background and really unique lens on this this area. So I'm going to continue the story, and then I'm going to get us into the LTAD Playground itself. And then at the end, I'm going to turn it back over to Rick and Tony, and they're going to finish the show in terms of what's happened in the last couple of years since the inaugural LTAD Summit. And then also they're going to talk about some current events. So as Rick, showcased there, he was very instrumental with his efforts in the National Strength and Conditioning Association. At this time, I'm at Michigan State. as a prof. Tony's at Eastern Michigan as a prof. We both live in East Lansing. Actually, for a while, we lived a few blocks apart. But while I was at Michigan State, I founded and I directed this program called Spartan Performance, which was all based on long-term athletic development principles. I then got an itch to leave academia. I went to a national governing body, USA Football, to help them with the development and the implementation of their long-term athletic development model, or their American development model, as the USOC national governing bodies call it. But one reason why I left academia is, and Tony and I had these conversations that, you know, the research that we do, the white papers, the position papers that are out there, they're all fine and dandy. And Rick was alluding to that as well. But what's really needed is, you know, grassroots efforts for implementation. So I was at USA Football in Indianapolis. I still had my home here in East Lansing. I would come back home on the weekends, and Tony and I frequent a local watering hole called Ellison's. It's a brewery a few blocks from our house, and of course, we all know that the best ideas are germinated in pubs. And so we're chatting about long-term athletic development in general, but also our frustrations that we know what to do, we're just not doing it. And so we formulated this idea and this plan to hold this long-term athletic development summit and then have subsequent workshops across the country. And at about the same time, Rick and I began doing some work together at the NSCA. And I just told Tony, I said, we need to call Rick and get Rick on board as well. And we want to do something that's very organic and grassroots, and we want to do it with and for the people. So that kind of brings us to the event. And Rick, if you want to put the slides back up to give people a visual about what this event really looks like, we call it the LTAD Playground. The event itself is unique in terms of its format, and it's based on pubs, it's based on TED Talks, and it's based on anthropology. So let me explain that a little bit. So when we typically go to a conference or a workshop, there's hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people, and you sit in a chair, and you sit in that chair for 50 minutes and you listen to a lecture, and then you listen to another lecture, and then another one, and then another one. And then meanwhile, there's all these smart people and people with great experiences and great ideas who could be sharing, but they're just left in their chairs. And just one person who's on stage gets to speak. They get the stage. So we wanted to change that and have a more interactive format. The first thing that we do is we limit the number of attendees to 40 to 50. And there's a reason for that number, and it's based on anthropology. So there's something called Dunbar's number. And Dunbar's number suggests that there's a cognitive and a social limit to the number of people with whom one person can maintain a stable social relationship. And that number is 150. I'll tell you why 40 to 50 comes into play here. So in prehistoric times, that 150 was a tribe, but that tribe consisted of families and then clans. So there's typically 5 people in a family or your kin and 50 people in a clan. So put in another way, we usually are closest to no more than 5 people. We typically will call 15 people really good friends, and we can call 50 people friends. Thus, that's why we limit the participation of 40 to 50, because we want it to be this really intimate, interactive environment where people could form in a relatively short time, and with the setup that we have, close relationships so that they could remain allies as they go out to continue this, as Rick said, revolution towards long-term athletic development and best practices in youth sport and physical activity. Another important aspect is the seating. So you'll see here round tables. So when we do these events, we specifically request that we have round tables. And again, at these round tables, we have 5 people per table. So again, that's your family, that's your kin at that table. The other thing about 5 goes along with Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos's 2 pizza rule. So he will only have meetings in which the number of people in the meeting can be fed by 2 pizzas. It's the 2 pizza rule. Because as soon as you get too many people in a meeting, you know what happens, right? Nothing gets done. Productivity declines. So we put 5 people at a table so that they could converse. And again, that round table also facilitated conversation. So if you think about a lunchroom and you have these long tables or a dining room table, you have people at one end, they have one conversation going. You have people at the other end, they have another conversation going. And so the round table facilitates one conversation. And so speaking of conversations, where do the best conversations happen? As I mentioned, they happened in pubs and they happen in coffee houses. So again, the LTAD Playground was meant to have this pub-like or coffee house feel to it. And then to facilitate the conversations, we use TED Talk principles for the main speakers. So by that, I mean, we're using the scientific underpinning of TED Talk duration of 18 minutes because humans get a cognitive backlog after listening for longer than 18 minutes. So we limited that time for that main speaker for 18 minutes. And then we finished off the rest of the half-hour segment, if you will, with a 10-minute roundtable discussion. So again, not only is the main speaker presenting, whatever topic they're speaking of, and I'll kind of go through the playlist, but it's allowing everybody who attends to have a voice and to share their experiences as well. So if Rick was talking about, the NSCA position statement on the 10 pillars, he's going to talk for 20 minutes. For the next 10 minutes at our roundtable, myself, 4 others, we're going to talk about, hey, I really like what Rick said about this. Hey, here's things that I do. So it's bringing in more information related to that topic as well. You're also going to see this big yellow sticky note on the table as well. So if the talk's 18 minutes, 10 minutes for conversation, we would give a 2-minute warning. At that 2-minute warning, we would tell individuals at that table, write down 3 important ideas or key points that were discussed either in the main talk or during your roundtable conversation following the talk. And then what we would do is we would collect those, and you can see over here on the bottom right hand, we would post those up in a place that everybody else could see everybody else's ideas and conversations. And then we would use those to summarize the conference. So again, it's not just Joe, Rick, and Tony summarizing what happened. It's everybody in a town hall format summarizing what happened during the LTAD Playground and taking forward action items. So to finish explaining the playground, I'm going to turn it over to the two other amigos here. So Rick, can you go to the next slide, please? Let's just go through what the events look like and what a day or a day and a half looks like. And again, this was put together very purposefully as well. We wanted to tell a story as we went through the day. Because again, you go to conferences sometimes and it's, topic A, topic X, topic K, whatever, and it doesn't really weave a story. So we wanted to weave a story from the start to the finish. So we start with basic principles. Again, what is long-term athletic development? What is the American development model, followed by breakout groups? And then we go into LTAD in action. We try to find examples locally of people who are doing some really good things using principles of long-term athletic development in a school, community, recreation, or in the private setting. And there's people on this call who were actually part of LTAD in action, and they shared in a TED Talk format what they've been doing, how they put LTAD principles in action in those environments. Again, having a breakout after each of those talks. Obviously break for lunch, and then in the afternoon we get people up and moving. So we'd have LTAD in practice where we go through how do we teach fundamental movement skills? How do we incorporate those into a practice, into a dynamic warm-up? What are some fundamental basic strength and conditioning activities that every coach, every youngster should be doing to enhance their overall athleticism? And then also talk about small-sided games as well, and how to incorporate those into practices. And then we finish off with the implementation piece, which is really the most important part. But part of that is, how do you build buy-in? How do you sell it? How do you convince? How do you persuade stakeholders in your community? And then, as I mentioned, we have this town hall forum at the end. But really our purpose is, when people leave the LTAD playground, it's our goal that, number one, they better understand long-term athletic development, but more importantly, that they take home with them tools and resources. And we want them to be what I call a Paul Revere. So if you remember that story, right? Paul Revere sets out north from Boston, and he's warning that the British are coming. Well, one thing that's lost in that story is that other people, upon hearing that, they mounted their horses and they continued to ride through the countryside, warning others in other communities and farms and everything, this message. So we, Tony, Rick, and I kind of see ourselves as Paul Revere during an LTAD playground. Now we have 40 or 50 other individuals who are going to mount their horses, go out into their communities, and be empowered to do something like a LTAD playground within their own community, to get stakeholders, coaches, teachers, parents, all the key stakeholders in youth sport and physical activity in their community on the same page, and implementing a true long-term athletic development model. So that's how the event operates. I think what we want to do now, and I'm kind of going to turn over and be the moderator again here, but asking Tony and Rick some things that have transpired since this inaugural event in Philadelphia. But the other thing that we're going to do here, Tony and Rick, is we're going to invite people who are on the call today to kind of share what they've been doing the past 2 years as well. So get some input from people on the call who have been to one of these events, what they've been doing the past few years as well. And again, you guys can share what we've been doing, and then we're going to wrap up with what's going on right now. Where are we at as of May 2020 with these efforts, not only ourselves, but what's going on a national level as well. So maybe it's Tony's turn to talk and kind of give a little bit of an update, what's been going on the last couple of years.
Sure. Say, Rick, could you put that framework slide up, and then I'll explain to everybody what's going on. And it's great to see some familiar faces and friends, and some new faces, and hopefully some new friends, and help us, as Joe says, to kind of spread the message in terms of what it is that we're doing. And I think, when we first the 30 of us kind of got together to try to assemble all of this, there are so many moving parts and pieces as it relates to participation in physical activity and youth sport. And I think when you look at many of the issues or concerns and things of that nature as it relates to the state of the United States right now in terms of health and well-being, there are a lot of players. You have players such as the USOPC, the U.S. Olympic Committee. You have the National Youth Sports Strategy, which was initiated by the Department of Health and Human Services. Project Play, Tom Ferry. You've got Healthy People 2030, the National Physical Activity Alliance, both initiatives that are supported by multiple organizations. Shape America, Health Move Minds. When you look at the big picture things, a lot of these organizations have a very, very similar vision. If you look at their mission statements and their objectives, you will find in there increased physical activity or enhanced physical literacy. All of them are all moving in the same direction, but as Rick often takes away from this, we all don't have our oars moving at the same time or in unison. So I think where we're at right now, and a lot of the things that Joe, Rick, and myself have been doing is to try to make connections among the leadership in many of these organizations and agencies that all want the same thing. I think, again, when you look at the big picture, We all want a physically literate culture, and we have to understand, well, how is that going to happen if we're all moving in our own direction and we're not communicating? How is that going to happen? How do we encourage physical activity among our youth, young adults, the elderly? How do we encourage opportunities for free play or semi-structured play, these types of things? And I think there are two, when we look at these frameworks, and again, when you look at the vision and you look at the objectives of these organizations, the two primary chief driving opportunities for this occur in the youth sport arena and in physical education. And we know that there are issues and problems, concerns in both of these areas. We know if you take physical education in and of itself, we know that there's a decline in opportunities, resources, teachers, opportunities to provide a quality physical education experience in the schools in the United States right now. Youth sport, we're all familiar with. The concerns there in terms of the opportunities for kids to have the opportunity to choose the sport it is they want to play, sports specialization, and overuse injuries, and all types of psychosocial issues related to the youth sport experience. And so a lot of these organizations collectively, they can make a tremendous amount of impact if they were to work together. And I would just say that this has kind of been, in terms of my role, when I look at the big scheme of things, is how do we get all of these people to kind of communicate and talk to each other so that we can move this in one direction in unison, get all the oars moving in the same direction at the same time. So I kind of just collected, and some of you have seen this previously on Twitter or Facebook, whatever it might be, but essentially it's all of these organizations. And I know that many of us belong to some of these organizations or affiliate with some of these organizations in some capacity. How do we get together to create a framework to kind of support this ultimate objective that we all talk about? We're very good at talking the talk, as Joe indicated. We have the position papers, we have the white papers, we have multiple discussions, seminars, symposiums, conferences. We have plenty of that. What we're really lousy at is we do not walk the walk very well. And it's very evident. We can see this in the status of physical education, we see it in youth sport, and we just see it in physical activity in general. We are not good at walking the walk. And so this is kind of what's the impetus, or what's driving us right now, is to try to get these people to communicate and more or less kind of talk to each other. So I would appreciate any feedback or input for any of you out there who maybe perhaps have some initiatives in your area, or anything that maybe perhaps that you're doing that might help initiate or help drive this opportunity to work together. Any ideas? Cricket.
No, they do. Maybe they're not unmuting their mic. If you have an idea, if you're listening in and have an idea, please unmute yourself so you could share with us.
Tony,
everybody. Sorry. Yeah, I was just, the old counselor in me counted for 10 seconds into the awkward silence, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to say something. It's the $1 million question, Tony, right? And I saw that one of our friends on the call from Canada had talked about what's going on there, and I think that the challenge for us, of course, is that we don't have a Ministry of Sport, but even our Canadian friends would argue that even with one, the challenges are immense. And I know we have Terry from Shape on here, and we've got folks that are members of the NCAA, and we've got folks that might be affiliated peripherally with Project Play, and we have the impact of ESPN and Nike and other for-profit organizations that have their own best interest in mind. And so I love what you have here, because it does sort of send the direction towards a certain framework. It's just, if we had the answer, I hope we would be doing it. I'm curious about, I forget what it's even called now, because there's so many acronyms out there in terms of National Youth this or National Youth that, but the one that fell under Health and Human Services, was that, does that have any teeth, or was that just another feel-good organization that got put together without any real power to do anything? So I think having conversations like this are super important. I think getting to 30,000 feet and trying to influence there, but Rick alluded to it, and I think most of us on here realize that the magic happens boots on the ground. And so that's my 2 cents for what it's worth.
Thanks, Steve. And I'm just going to make 2 statements here. The first of which is none of these initiatives here that you're looking at have teeth. None of them. None of them have traction because we haven't done anything in the last, 40, 30, 20, 10 years. How many healthy people, 2030s, 2020, 2010, 2000, 1990, what have we done? It just get worse. So to answer the first topic there, do they have teeth or traction? Absolutely not. Ministry of Sport, it's on this call. Everybody on this call is the American Ministry of Sport. And even though I know there are some Canadians on here, thank you, Wendy, for being present. I have stolen from Wendy. I took her athlete program that I learned at the summit, and I implemented it in my youth lacrosse program. So we can steal from each other, we can borrow from each other, whatever it might be, but I think on this call, you are looking at the American Ministry of Sport, because these are the individuals that are concerned and interested in actually having to do something and get traction or teeth in their community. Anybody else?
I'll say something. So can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So since the first playground, the past 3 years, I've been working on the parents first. So I work with a lot of elementary, middle, and high school kids. And I've been showing parents my curriculum based on age group and just informing them of what's going on physiologically and socially at each age group. And I found that parents appreciate that a lot, and they're more likely to support a youth strength and conditioning program when there's a deep thought process behind it. And I've been working on just really building up a strong community of soccer parents in my area through Facebook groups, email lists, and giving them both research and practice. So like you guys alluded to, instead of just speaking and telling, like walking the walk and showing them, whether that's through improvement in video footage or reevaluation and assessment, they want to see something visual that their kid is moving well and they're getting faster or whatever it may be. So that's definitely helped a lot. As far as the coaches, that's my next project now. I find it hard, especially in the soccer community here. There's a lot of clubs that are resistant to strength and conditioning programs because they're filling up their extra time or the extra money in their budget with more skills training or other soccer camps, and there's not a lot of focus on the physical development side. So my next project is to create a mentorship course for soccer coaches. So not just in Maryland, in my area, but throughout the world, to help them implement a better warm-up, how to incorporate strength onto the field and make it more of an intensive mentorship for them, so that clubs, since they're not hiring strength and conditioning coaches, then I'm just going to go through the coaches and I can help so many people through that model. So that's going to be the next project. But I would love to hear what anyone else is doing as far as getting in with youth sports clubs. It's definitely hard, especially with the year-round model and money and priorities with skill work, more sport-specific work. So that's definitely been the struggle.
Thanks, Erica. Rick, I guess, can you put up my East Lansing Youth Lacrosse? Yeah, so just to kind of follow up with what Erica Suter brought up, and Erica, if you get a chance, make sure you dial into, I'll try to shoot a plug here in the chat, but she puts a tremendous amount of resources out there for soccer coaches and parents and athletes at all levels, and she's done an incredible amount of work in the last couple of years. There's another individual on this call, JP Patnud, who's also from the LTAD Summit Playground, created his own business and does quite a bit with kids. So it's good to see that those of you that attended that first summit are out there now actually implementing long-term athletic development into your business. And I mentioned earlier that I'm a youth lacrosse administrator, and I understand some of the issues and problems that you have to deal with in terms of coaches who are set in their ways, parents who maybe perhaps don't understand the scope of youth sport, and kids. Those are the biggest stakeholders in all of this. And so I'm not really quite sure where I acquired this schematic, and I'm not much of an originator of much. Like I said earlier, I steal a lot of things, and I just kind of threw this together here. And something that I could show that was simple, concise, easy to follow for coaches, parents, officials, other league administrators, in terms of how are we going to do things for our small community recreation lacrosse program. And we segment things by grade in terms of participation: 3rd and 4th grade, 5th and 6th, and 7th and 8th. And I just kind of put some points here, or commentary here, in terms of, what is it that's important to us from kindergarten to 4th grade for our kids? What are the things that are important from 5th to 8th grade? And as we all know, between 5th and 8th grade, there can be a tremendous amount of emotional and physical variability. So you're going to see a lot of variability in the things that you implement here. And then what's the outcome? What is the potential outcome of these kids as they get into high school? And this is something that I share at every initial parent meeting. And I will post it in our materials, and I'll post it in our Facebook site, and we'll tweet it, so parents understand from start to finish what direction is their kid following. And my question is, does your business, league, program, or community, do you have a plan? It doesn't have to look like this, but is it a plan that's simple, concise, and direct for all the stakeholders to kind of not only envision, but realize? And I think when we talk about when we initially launched this LTAD Playground concept, the key was to make it grassroots, to get it into the hands of the people who work in the community, who work in these youth sport development, small business types of scenarios, to get it in the physical education setting. It's fantastic to have several physical educators in on this call, because in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, but it's my stern belief, that physical education can have the greatest impact in terms of getting the youth sport culture and physical literacy to evolve in the United States, because it's someplace that every child you would expect to be in the school setting. So when we talk about giving things and ideas teeth, the teeth come from what you as individuals do in your respective local setting to create these models and make them simple for people who don't have the background that all of us have. It's a big assumption that we have, is that we've all been trained in principles of exercise physiology and motor development and motor learning, motor behavior, on and on. But the constituents, the people that we're trying to communicate this message to, don't have that background. So we have to put it in a way that they can digest. And that gives our movement teeth. And this is for everything: community sport, physical education, whatever it might be. This is your biggest advocacy tool. We always talk about advocacy. Well, it's difficult to advocate if people don't understand the message that it is you're trying to get across. And so for me, that's why I kind of put together this model, so I can get to the points that I want people to emphasize. That this is not, it's not a microwave, it's a crock pot. It's going to take time. So simple things like this are things that you can do in your own setting to get your constituents, to get your stakeholders to kind of give teeth to the movement. So I'll stop right there, and if anybody has any commentary, or Rick, and Joe, if you want some commentary as well, just chime in. I'll shut up.
Yeah, Tony, thanks for presenting that. And that might be a good place. I know Jeff Richardson is on the call, and he's been doing some really great stuff over the last few years. And it kind of fits in with what you're talking about here. So Jeff, if you want to unmute yourself and kind of explain the actions that you've taken in your community, successes and challenges, sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. First off, I just want to say, like, that initial LTAD Playground, I think that the best thing, as you talked about, Joe, with the setup, was, I'm like Tony, I steal stuff, and I find people that know a lot more than I do, and I steal what they do and take it and make it my own and in my own setting. And like that setup of only having 5 or 6 people there at a table allowed me to find out what backgrounds these people had and make that connection and then be able to keep in touch. And like you said, I see a lot of people on here that I've stolen ideas from, had conversations with Erica, Wendy, Steve, Joe, Tony, Rick. You know, we've all had conversations about, here's what I see, here's what I'm dealing with. Now, how do we attack that? And just the fact of no egos. Everybody is in this to allow kids to have a better experience. And I think that's the key, is there are no egos. Everybody's willing to share. Everybody wants to see everybody else have a success story. For myself, being in a small town, I live in Houston, Missouri, which is a town of about 3,000 people. And so the cool thing is, like, I get to be involved in a lot. I'm a middle school PE teacher, high school baseball coach. I've got an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I'm attacking this on a lot of different angles. From the PE side, I've done everything I can to be involved in every conversation that I possibly could and kind of share my thoughts. So as soon as I got back, let's see, it would have been the next August after the first LTAD Playground, I sat down with all my administration and kind of shared what I thought PE should look like at our school. I also have joined like the middle school leadership team so that I can give PE a voice in any decision that's being made. And actually, we're switching around our schedule so that kids will have PE class right before some of their most difficult classes, just by looking at that research. From a baseball standpoint, obviously, I've taken this and looked at, okay, what's the development look like when they're younger, and how do we make that go from the time they start playing till I see them as high schoolers. And then I also joined the Parks and Rec board so that I could be a voice there as well. And let me just say, like, you would think that the background I have and the experience I'd have, people would listen, but they're not always going to listen. But I think it's important to continue to offer that voice, find as much information on the topic as possible, and just continue to kind of share and have conversations. I started a kind of like a baseball organization where I do camps, and I had 10 kids last summer, but a couple of those kids told their parents they didn't even want to play on a baseball team the next summer, like as in this summer. They just wanted to come to the camp because like that was the experience they had. So like slowly but surely making headway. And what's that been, 3 years now? And I feel like I'm still gaining traction. So anybody out there that's looking to do something, don't feel like you go 3 months and nothing's moved and you're like, oh, this is frustrating. Yeah, it's going to be frustrating. And, it just takes time and takes conversations and keep having them and keep having at it.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Jeff. Really appreciate that. So, anybody else who attended, one of the events want to share what they've been doing the last few years, and even people who, are on the call today and really learning about the long-term athletic development playground and other things that are happening in the space. If you have questions, feel free to unmute, ask your question, tell your story.
Hi, Joe. I'll speak.
Excellent.
Having attended the LTAD Playground, it was a little unnerving for me to kind of stretch myself and put myself out there, because what I do is try to help teenagers between 15 and 18 become coaches, officials, and sport volunteers. So I had built a program at that time for about 7 or 8 years and was kind of finally able and willing to share it as it had grown and I had seen some success. So I thank you guys, you three amigos, for giving me that voice and that chance to grow some confidence, to get out of my little safe bubble of the city that I live in. And in the last few years, I've really seen the success of the students who have gone through the program and where they've taken it. So I know some of you were at the Child to Champion last weekend and could see the case studies on where some of these athletes, as they transitioned into active for life and or playing sport past 18 years of age, how they are still either coaching or becoming officials and assisting in sport organizations as they age. And I'll even just use one example. One of our, whom I didn't even mention last weekend, Peyton, in first year kinesiology, she has partnered with a organization that has 4,000 soccer players in her area in a rec league. And they've now created a Little Movers program. And we use the word movers on purpose because we didn't want to scare off the athlete kind of term that gets a lot of people kind of apprehensive to consider themselves an athlete. So this is basically for 9 through 11-year-olds, and it's a multi-sport program that rotates through lots of sports and I guess physical literacy activities. Some parents still like to see the word sports, and it's at over 30 elementary schools, and it's headed to launch. It was supposed to start, but due to COVID, it's been pushed back, and rotating through 18 weeks of all kinds of different activities, a week at a time, just to promote the physical literacy and fundamental movement skills, fundamental sport skills, etc. So again, there's been all kinds of ways that I've kind of mentored more people to take initiative and have the confidence to take initiative, because I think that's the biggest thing, is that people like me who are very grassroots, high school and elementary school phys ed teacher and coach, we look at people as the academics and we read your research, and to put it into practice and work with you is kind of, in my opinion, the best way to move it forward. As you mentioned, you can't have ego in this game. And the more we work together, the more we can make a change from the bottom up and the top down. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Awesome, Wendy. Thanks for sharing. As people on this call are alluding to in the chat box, the program is amazing, and we would be delighted to have you on LTAD chat sometime to kind of give an overview and then do a Q&A with people, because it is, as I tell everybody, such a hidden gem. I mean, it's a fabulous program that people need to understand. So, kind of as we kind of close out the morning, I kind of want Tony and Rick to take the mic again and kind of talk about some of the things that they've been attending more than I have at the national level. It's something, the buzzword that's being used is collective impact, and it kind of goes back to what Tony was talking about with all these major organizations trying to get on the same page. So I'm just going to turn it back over to the two of them to kind of take us out of the morning and describe where we are, May 2020, with some of these major organizations. But again, the thing that we can't lose sight of are the people on this call and the grassroots approaches that are taking shape. We all agree that it's going to continue to take these grassroots efforts. And again, my plug again is going to be, you all need to be the Paul Reveres. Let's not wait for the American College of Sports Medicine or the National Youth Sports Strategy to take shape and, again, have another white paper, right? But no resources behind it. We are the foot soldiers. But you need to get into your communities and speak the message more widely as well. So with that said, Tony, Rick, if you guys want to share, some of the meetings that you guys have been in at this higher level and what their thoughts are.
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead, Rick, fire away.
All right, yeah, I'll just start off quickly because we're going back to, we're kind of almost doing the progression of where we were. After we did our first LTAD Playground, we'd actually asked for continuing education through NSCA, which they gladly provided. That actually led to meetings at headquarters between us, Michael Masick, the executive director, to be able to see how we could move playgrounds forward. So we're excited about some of that, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that got us involved he helped set us up with other organizations who are in the game. We're all involved in a lot of these organizations anyway, but he found an organizations that we could actually get together with who were already together in an informal structure. So after we'd had our playgrounds, we all attended the first ADM summit that they had as well. And there were some commonalities that came out of that. Among them were to involve physical education. So in a lot of these calls and strategies, unfortunately, they haven't been at the table. So involve ACSM. They're at some of the tables. They've had a change in leadership. So that's kind of an evolving process too. But you can see some of these groups that are listed here, there are a lot of things that are going on. So I just kind of wanted to frame that a little bit before Tony went ahead and told everybody what's happening. So hit it, Tony. You're muted.
Thank you. So, yeah, I just kind of threw this slide together just to kind of, again, try to represent the idea of, you know, we have so many different organizations and position statements and position papers and white papers and so forth, and we need to kind of put them together because it is a puzzle right now. And to really to solve this puzzle, we have to kind of put the pieces together, and it takes time. And we've made pretty good strides, I would say, in the last couple of years. You know, a couple of years ago, we really didn't have this opportunity to communicate with many of the leaders of these organizations. And in the last couple of years, we've had the opportunity to make those personal connections, and now we're in the process of trying to get those people to talk to each other. And I know that there are some of you on this call, a lot of good friends. Trent Suzuki, for one, longtime friend, and I know that Terry Drain, I've met at a couple of meetings. We met in Winnipeg at the physical literacy meeting in Winnipeg, and I know both of you are in California. I know both of you are physical educators. Chris Temez, you're on this call as well. So it's really good to see those of you in the physical education realm, and hopefully you can take some of these concepts or ideas and get them to spread through your organization and get them into the grassroots level, that this framework, it's a very simple framework, can be implemented to advocate for physical education as an important piece, and to work collectively within your own, not collectively among organizations, but even within organizations, like Joe, Rick, and myself have done with the NSCA. And then those of you who also work within other organizations. Did somebody want to say something? So just to kind of finish what I was saying, just kind of, what's that?
Yeah. Rick, is there any
Robert Calderon is unmuted, and I think he's
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Rick, can you mute?
So anyway, to try to give, again, as we talk about, you know, actions and positions papers that kind of have no teeth to them, we are the teeth. We are the Ministry of Sport and Physical Activity in the United States, if you will. It's a very informal structure, but that's just the way it is right now. And so, you know, Rick, Joe, and myself are just three individuals that have our own separate, you know, career paths and occupations. And this is just really what you're seeing is just a passion of ours. We don't represent anybody. We're not subsidized by anybody. We're just trying to help put the puzzle together, but we cannot do it alone. It's really going to take the work of a lot of people. And we look at you on this call as being critical pieces of that puzzle, and how we can all fit that pieces of the puzzle together and kind of move forward. So I'll just finish with that in terms of collective impact.
The only other piece I'll add to that, Tony, is that I think what the playgrounds have been able to provide, we've had two kind of different conversations going on here. One is that there's a need for some top-down organization among these groups you have listed on your collective impact puzzle. And then what we're really seeing is that when we get boots on the ground and we get to meet with everybody who really does have all their oars in the same direction, we need to be able to unite those two. Let those up top see what everybody's doing on the ground, and let those on the ground know that they're getting support from the top-down organizations. And I think that's kind of what the playgrounds are developing and building upon, is that we can kind of be that conduit where we can bridge that gap between the two and really bring a good connection societally to where we need to go.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. We're kind of at the top of the hour here, and we usually try to stay an hour, but I know there's a lot of loyal followers and people that are doing really good things in this space that are still on the call. So I guess pub style, we'll go last call here for comments. So if anybody has any further comments or questions about things that were discussed today, feel free again to unmute yourself, ask a question, and then we'll kind of wrap up here.
I'm going to ask a quick, somewhat self-serving question given the current situation. So two of my programs in Denver have already been canceled. There's been some unilateral decisions made in terms of what will happen in certain municipalities or schools or towns in terms of summer camps and programs. So one of the things we're dealing with in Connecticut for sure is we're going to have to stay in cohorts of 10, and we're going to have to think through social distancing. And so I would love to crowdsource people. We don't need to do it here, but maybe offline. You could email me, steve@241sports. What you're doing that's working, that is fun for kids, knowing that there's going to be some social distancing limitations and a need to keep things, and schools are going to have to deal with this obviously in the fall on the PE side. And I know some decisions have been made about maybe moving football to the spring in certain states, et cetera. So if I might have a camp of say 200 kids in cohorts of 10 that are used to jumping from sport to sport. What activities are you doing where kids are having fun, they're competing to some extent, but we're practicing good social distancing? And again, I'm thinking backyard stuff, combination of sports stuff, a lot of target stuff, things like that. So if folks are interested in even having maybe a side call where we brainstorm and sort of share the knowledge in the room, would love that. Love videos, anything you can share. I will borrow, steal, give back, barter, whatever you guys want to do. Use the term, Tony. What is it? Steal? Is that what we're going with?
Steal, yeah.
Okay.
Steal.
All right. So thanks for any help folks can give on that. But we're trying to be as creative but as impactful as possible. And I know there's a lot of smart people on this call.
Yeah, Steve, if you want to drop your contact information in the chat box again, happy for you to lead that, and we can use this forum if we want to do something around that. I almost see that as a mini playground, if you will, because we can use breakout rooms as well. So it's not 25 people or 40 people or whatever it is on one call. We can use breakout rooms for different topics and kind of rotate rooms as well, so we can brainstorm along there, right? And as you know, Project Play has been putting out some resource guides related to post-COVID, as well as our other groups, National Strength and Conditioning, more specific to that environment, the strength and conditioning environment, but they put out some stuff as well. But yeah, it's on everybody's mind for sure. So on behalf of Tony and Rick, definitely want to thank everybody for being on the call, and more importantly, for your efforts in this space. We always talk about the echo chamber. This has been a bit of an echo chamber this morning. And again, getting you to be the Paul Revere and to continue to ride out into your communities and spread this message and have town hall discussions and pub discussions around, best practices in youth physical activity and youth sports is really important. The next LTAD chat is a really nice follow-up to this one, because we have 4 individuals from the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee who are going to share the American Development Model. Chris Snyder, who is the Director of Coaching, will be on the call, at least for the first 30 minutes. He has another obligation, but he's going to share early on in the call. And then 3 coach education leaders at 3 different national governing bodies are going to be on that as well. It's going to be Wednesday, May 13th at 7 p.m. Eastern. We have others in the queue as well. You can stay updated by following us on social media. And then you can also find all the sessions, because they are recorded and posted at the LTAD YouTube channel, which I dropped in the chat box. So again, thanks for joining us and learning about the LTAD Playground and current efforts in this space that the three amigos and everybody else on this call has been engaged in. Always willing to take feedback, ideas about, future LTAD chats as well. Again, this is really an extension of our efforts when we first started. Like, we want this to be interactive. We want this to be sharing. We want to bring, leaders in the space to have a voice, but then to hear what others are thinking and doing, boots on the ground, so that we can continue to provide, really good information and resources to other people outside of this echo chamber as well. So thanks again for everybody being here this morning.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.